In the deepest corners of the galaxy, a prophecy was whispered among the oldest and most secretive of races, ancient even before the first star maps were drawn. The Valen, the Kori, and the Eldra. They knew the signs. They had seen civilizations rise and fall across millennia, but none like the humans. It began with the first sightings of ships and strange broadcasts coming from a planet known only as Earth, a species that had once crawled in the mud and now built crude vessels to traverse the stars. And the elders gathered in secret councils, speaking of the strange energy that pulsed from Earth, far more powerful than any that should have emanated from a species so young and untested. They feared what was to come. They spoke in quiet voices of the human potential, a potential so vast and untapped that it could either uplift the galaxy or burn it to the ground. Their warnings were clear. Humans would either rise as the most unstoppable force in the galaxy, or they would be consumed by their own ambition. The galaxy had seen nothing like them. No species had the drive to evolve so quickly, to learn so fast, to adapt, and above all to fight with a kind of unyielding ferocity that no one could match. The Galactic Council was oblivious. They dismissed these warnings as paranoia. Some said it was the last gasp of dying races who couldn't stand the thought of a new power rising from the ashes of the old order. They scoffed at the idea that humanity could ever challenge the balance of power that had existed for centuries. In their eyes, humans were nothing more than a blip on the galactic radar, a species too primitive, too unpredictable to be taken seriously. But there were those who knew better. The Valen emissary was the first to speak out in the council chambers, calling for immediate action. He was old, and his voice was laden with the weight of centuries of observation. The Valen had seen the growth of civilizations. They had watched stars die and civilizations rise from the dust, but they had never encountered anything like humanity. He pleaded with the council to intervene, to at least keep humanity from spreading beyond its cradle, but his voice was drowned in the flood of ridicule. The Kori representative had similar concerns, but they kept their warnings quiet, unsure whether to trust the prophecy or let the galaxy see for itself what humans would become. Instead, they began to quietly prepare their fleets, moving them to the edges of their borders, ready to respond to any sign that humanity might be a threat. The Eldra, a peaceful race with a history of patience and diplomacy, chose to remain neutral. At first, their council members sat back and watched humanity's rise with a cold and calculating gaze. They knew that any interference would be seen as a threat, and the galaxy was full of threats already, so they waited, observing from afar, letting time unravel its answers to them. Humans were a curiosity, but they would not act until they knew more. As the debates raged across the council halls, humanity's influence continued to spread unnoticed. The first human colonies on distant worlds were already making a name for themselves, their shipyards brimming with activity, their explorers charting deep into the unknown. It was only a matter of time before the prophecy was proven true, but for now the galaxy turned a blind eye, and the clock began to tick down to the inevitable confrontation. The first major test of humanity's resolve came sooner than anyone expected. A small human colony on the fringe of known space caught the attention of the Arcani Empire, a race of cold and calculating conquerors known for their immense military power and ruthless expansion. The humans on this colony were no different from any other settlers, unremarkable in many ways. They were simple miners and engineers working the rich resources of a distant world that had been deemed unimportant by the larger galactic powers. It was nothing more than a speck of dust in the galaxy, yet the Arcani saw potential in taking control of this remote system. They saw it as a stepping stone to further conquest. The Arcani sent an envoy demanding that the colony submit to their rule or face immediate annihilation. They made their message clear: their empire would not tolerate defiance in this distant sector. The humans were expected to comply or suffer the consequences. But when the Arcani fleet arrived, they found something they had not anticipated. The humans did not panic, they did not flee. Instead, they fought back in ways no one had expected. They used the terrain of their new world to their advantage, hiding their small ships among the dense forests and craggy mountains, using guerrilla tactics that the Arcani were ill-prepared for. The first attack struck like a thunderclap. The Arcani fleet barely had time to respond as small human ships launched a devastating surprise assault against their supply lines. The humans had no large warships, no massive fleets, but they knew their world better than anyone. The Arcani were caught off guard. Their advanced technology was useless against the human ingenuity that turned the very landscape into a weapon. The Arcani began to panic as they realized they had underestimated their opponents. The humans continued to hit their attackers in swift and calculated strikes, disabling ships and leaving the Arcani forces disorganized and vulnerable. The Arcani generals were furious. How could a colony of primitive humans hold their own against their mighty fleet? Their pride and confidence were shattered as the days wore on, and the humans fought back relentlessly with no signs of yielding. In the midst of the chaos, the Arcani sent a second wave of reinforcements, thinking they could overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. But this only worsened their situation. The humans had anticipated this move and laid a series of traps that decimated the reinforcements before they even had a chance to land. The humans' use of unconventional warfare left the Arcani in disarray. Their military doctrine was useless here on this alien world where they could not control the terrain. The humans' actions began to send shockwaves across the galaxy. A reputation spread like wildfire. An underdog victory over the mighty Arcani Empire could not be ignored. The galaxy watched as the Arcani fleet limped back to their homeworld in defeat and disarray. The humans had won, and the Arcani were humiliated. But the most surprising aspect of this victory was not the force with which the humans fought. It was their unwavering refusal to back down. It was their defiance against overwhelming odds that shook the very foundation of the galactic order. For the first time in ages, the balance of power had shifted, but the Galactic Council remained unconvinced. They dismissed the defeat as an anomaly, a fluke, but the surviving species who had watched the battle knew better. They saw the humans for what they were capable of, and they began to prepare for the day when humanity's influence would no longer be ignored. The victory of the humans over the Arcani was a spectacle that rippled through the galaxy, but as quickly as it spread, the galaxy's powers dismissed it. They could not fathom that such a young and insignificant species could pose a true threat to the established order. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the new development, but rather than take it seriously, most representatives laughed at the notion that the humans could disrupt the balance of power that had held for millennia. The Arcani's failure was blamed on poor tactics, not on the exceptional capabilities of humanity itself. The Council dismissed the entire incident as a series of lucky breaks and coincidences. The more cautious species like the Valen and the Kori raised their voices in alarm, urging that humanity should be watched carefully, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. The Council's chambers were filled with representatives of the major races, each having their own interests, their own agendas, their own desires to maintain the status quo. But none of them had a true grasp of what humanity had become. The humans had no history of intergalactic conquest, no reputation among the stars. Their early attempts at spacefaring had been clumsy, their technology outdated, yet something about the way they fought, the way they adapted to unforeseen circumstances, something in their very nature had caught the attention of those who dared to pay attention. It was a force unlike any the galaxy had known before. It was in their blood, their psyche, their core belief that they would never submit to anyone or anything. The Valen representative stood again, an elder among the council, his voice filled with centuries of experience, and yet it trembled with concern. He pleaded with the council to act before humanity's influence spread too far too fast. He spoke of their intelligence, their resourcefulness, their uncanny ability to improvise and adapt to every challenge put before them. He argued that such a species could quickly overwhelm the established galactic order if left unchecked, but his words fell on deaf ears. The council was too busy with other matters, and too convinced that the humans were nothing more than an anomaly. The Kori had always been wary of the humans, as well. Their ancient history had been filled with the rise of dangerous species and their fall when they became too bold. The Kori knew the consequences of underestimating an adversary, but they remained silent, watching from the sidelines. They had no interest in acting unless forced to. They preferred to wait and see how things unfolded. After all, the humans were only one species among many. The chances of them becoming a true threat seemed unlikely. For the Eldra, it was not a question of strength, but of diplomacy. They had long believed in the peaceful resolution of conflict, but the humans were unpredictable. They had no interest in appeasing anyone. They had no understanding of subtlety, no patience for long talks. They acted with immediate consequences. Their bluntness was both their strength and their weakness. The Eldra kept their distance, focusing instead on their own territories, knowing the humans would eventually make a move but unwilling to interfere until the situation demanded it. As the council session continued, the minutes stretched into hours. The debate became a drawn-out exchange of half-hearted concerns and baseless reassurances. Finally, the decision was made: the council would not take any action against humanity, not yet. At least the humans were left unchecked, free to expand their influence unchecked. As the galaxy's leaders returned to their old ways of complacency, they failed to realize the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. Humanity was already planning its next move, and the galaxy would soon see that ignoring the warning about humans would come with a heavy price. As the council turned its attention back to more familiar matters, humanity continued to grow its presence in the galaxy. The initial victory over the Arcani had only emboldened them, and their reach stretched further and further into the stars. With each new colony they established, the humans adapted quickly to their new environments, learning to harness the resources of alien worlds in ways no one had ever seen before. They were not just surviving, they were thriving. The technology they developed was raw yet remarkably effective. Their ships were far from the sleek and sophisticated designs of the major powers, but their crews were unmatched in their tenacity and creativity. Every time a human colony encountered an alien species, the humans found ways to communicate, negotiate, or defend their homes. If diplomacy failed, the humans never hesitated to fight back. They didn't seek to conquer, but they would defend their land with everything they had. And when alien forces attempted to intimidate them or take control, they fought back with unexpected precision. No one could predict their moves, and no one could stop them. Humans fought in a way that didn't follow any established patterns. Their strategies were unconventional. Their technology always seemed to be a step ahead of anyone else's. Their ability to learn from each encounter and turn it into an advantage gave them a lethal edge. It didn't take long for rumors to spread across the galaxy of these humans who fought like warriors, but thought like engineers. The Valen were the first to take notice. They had long been a peaceful race, focusing on diplomacy and trade, but even they began to recognize the implications of humanity's rapid expansion. They understood that the humans weren't just another species to add to the galaxy's collection. They were something else entirely, something unpredictable and dangerous. The Kori, who had always been wary of the humans, began to see them as more than just a threat to their borders, but a potential game changer that could upset the balance of power if allowed to continue unchecked. The Eldra, who had long believed in maintaining neutrality and peace, began to see cracks in their worldview. Humanity's refusal to accept anything less than their own terms was both troubling and fascinating. They were a species that did not fear conflict, but did not seem to seek it either. They would only fight when provoked, and in doing so they crushed anyone who challenged them. But despite their power, the Eldra refused to act too hastily. They knew better than to underestimate a species that seemed so unpredictable. Meanwhile, the human colonies continued to grow. Their numbers swelled as they expanded into new territories. Many of the smaller races that had once lived in the shadows of the larger galactic empires began to flock to humanity's cause. They saw in the humans a species that would not treat them as subordinates, but as equals. Those races who had long been oppressed by the larger powers now looked to humanity as a beacon of hope. The galaxy had seen the fall of great empires in the past, but they had never seen a species so united by the simple desire to live free from domination. As the humans expanded, they began to establish their own networks of trade and communication, building a web of influence that stretched farther than anyone anticipated. Soon entire systems fell under the sway of human-led alliances. The Council, however, remained blind to the rising power of humanity. They continued to focus on their own petty squabbles, while humanity's influence quietly grew stronger and stronger with each passing day. But in the corners of the galaxy, a new order was being forged, one that would soon make its presence known in ways no one could ignore. The Galactic Council had ignored the warnings for too long, and now they would face the consequences of their complacency. A coalition of alien factions, led by the Gorthan Alliance, had finally reached a breaking point. The humans were expanding too fast, and their growing influence was becoming impossible to ignore. The Gorthan were ruthless conquerors with a brutal track record, and they could not afford to let humanity continue unchecked. They would destroy the human colonies before they could spread further, and so the Gorthan gathered their fleets in secret, calling upon their allies among the Arcani and the Vartok to join in the invasion together. They would crush the humans before they could become a true threat to the galaxy's established order. The invasion began without warning. The Gorthan fleet descended upon the Outer Rim systems, where human colonies had begun to take root. Their warships were massive and heavily armed. The first wave hit with devastating force. They bombarded the human worlds from orbit, believing that the humans would cower under the onslaught and submit to their might. But they were wrong. The humans did not break. They did not surrender. They fought back with everything they had, using every scrap of technology they had developed. They retaliated in ways no one could have anticipated. The humans had learned from their previous victories, and now they were prepared. Each human world was a fortress in its own right, and the Gorthan found themselves locked in bitter, unyielding battles. Every time they attempted to land troops, they were met with fierce resistance. The human fighters were everywhere. They knew the terrain. They used the planet's natural resources to craft weapons and traps that the Gorthan could not overcome. They turned the very landscapes against them, striking from the shadows and retreating into the dense forests and mountains, as if the planet itself had become a weapon for them to wield. The Gorthan could not understand it. They had been so sure that their superior numbers and firepower would crush the humans in days, but every time they made progress, the humans regrouped and counterattacked. Their ability to adapt on the fly was unparalleled. Their war tactics were unpredictable and terrifying. The Gorthan's strategic plans fell apart as the humans continued to inflict staggering losses. They began to lose their confidence, and as their fleets faltered, their alliances began to show cracks. The Arcani, who had initially been eager to take part in the invasion, began to question the wisdom of their decision. They had never faced such determined and resourceful enemies before, and with each day that passed, it became more apparent that the humans were not going to fall easily. The human resistance grew in strength as more colonies joined the fight. Their unity began to show as they banded together in a way the Council had never seen before. The humans communicated with ease across vast distances, coordinating strikes and mobilizing forces with the precision of a race that had been at war for centuries. Though they had no true war fleets at first, their resolve and sheer adaptability allowed them to turn the tides. The Gorthan's once proud fleets were now in disarray, and the Alliance found themselves locked in a prolonged conflict that seemed to have no end. On Earth, the call went out for all human forces to unite. The Gorthan had underestimated the humans, and now the galaxy was witnessing what they were truly capable of. An underdog species with an unshakable will to survive had faced an empire far greater than themselves, and had driven them back time and time again. The galaxy began to take notice, but it was already too late. The Gorthan had ignited a firestorm they could not extinguish, and the humans were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. As the Gorthan and their allies reeled from the unexpected strength of the human resistance, the tide of the war began to shift. The Gorthan had assumed that their massive fleets and superior firepower would be enough to crush the human colonies, but the humans had proven them wrong again. And again, their ingenuity and adaptability had turned every engagement into a drawn-out struggle. The invaders had underestimated not just the humans' capacity to fight, but their resolve and the unity they had forged across the stars. Every human world was now a beacon of resistance, and in their determination they found new ways to counter the overwhelming forces of the Gorthan Empire. One by one, the human colonies began to push back against their invaders. Where there had once been retreat, there was now defiance. Where there had once been desperation, there was now strategy. Humans began to turn the very tide of the conflict, using their ships, their technology, and their unwavering belief in their cause to orchestrate a counteroffensive that no one had seen coming. The Gorthan, who had thought victory was within their grasp, were forced to fight a war of attrition, one they were ill prepared for. The Gorthan command began to fracture as the scale of their losses became undeniable. Their leaders argued over tactics and over the possibility of retreat. They had underestimated the human willpower, and now their fleets were stretched thin and morale among their forces began to plummet. The Gorthan commanders had expected quick and decisive victories, but instead they were mired in endless battles with no clear end in sight. The humans fought as though their very survival depended on it, because in truth it did. Amidst the chaos, the humans began to form alliances of their own. The smaller races that had once been bullied into submission by the larger empires now turned to humanity for support. They sought in the humans not just a chance to survive, but a chance to reshape the galaxy in their image. These races no longer feared the larger empires, but instead saw the humans as their liberators, and together they formed a new coalition that rivaled the old powers. The Gorthan now faced not just a united human resistance, but a growing army of diverse species who had sworn to fight alongside humanity for the future of the galaxy. The shift in power was palpable as the Gorthan were forced to retreat to their homeworlds to regroup. The once proud empire was now on the defensive. Their military might had proven to be no match for the human will, and the humans were relentless in their pursuit of victory. The Gorthan knew that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating their enemies, and that their empire would never be the same again. The galaxy had changed, and they had no idea how to stop it. Back in the Galactic Council, the tides were turning as well. Though many representatives had initially dismissed the human threat, it was becoming impossible to ignore the rise of humanity. The Council could no longer pretend that the humans were a passing anomaly. They had proved themselves on the battlefield time and time again. And now the galaxy was watching as they began to form alliances and reorganize their forces. Their rise was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a fact. The humans had made their mark on the galaxy, and the question was no longer whether they would survive, but what they would become. The once proud empires of the galaxy now found themselves on the edge of an unprecedented shift in power. The humans had shattered the old order, and in doing so had created a new one that would forever change the fate of the galaxy. As the Gorthan retreated and the humans surged forward, the old powers now faced a choice. Would they confront humanity head-on, or would they accept the inevitable rise of a new force among the stars, one that had never been seen before? As the Gorthan retreated into the depths of their homeworlds, the once formidable empire began to crumble beneath the weight of its defeat. The human counteroffensive had left the invaders with no choice but to pull back. Their military resources stretched thin, their fleets shattered, their morale shattered. They could no longer maintain the hold they had once had over their territories. Humanity had become the nightmare they never expected. The humans were not just survivors, they were conquerors, and they now had a galaxy to reshape. The Gorthan were not the only ones who had underestimated humanity's potential. The other galactic powers watched in stunned silence as humanity's influence spread with breathtaking speed. One by one, the empires began to feel the pressure as humans expanded their reach. Their growing alliances of smaller races now stood as a formidable challenge to the status quo. The Eldra, who had always championed diplomacy, began to see that the humans were a new kind of power, a force that could not be reasoned with through traditional means. The Valen, though reluctant to admit it, knew that humanity's rise could no longer be ignored, and the Kori, who had long feared the humans as a threat to their borders, began to realize that the humans would either be a new ally or the beginning of their decline. It was in this moment that the Galactic Council reconvened to address the growing storm humanity had unleashed on the galaxy. The members who had once mocked the Valen and the Kori for their warnings now sat in silence, unsure of how to proceed. No longer could they pretend that humanity's rise was a passing phase. No longer could they sit idly by as a new power reshaped the very fabric of the galaxy. The old order was dead, and in its place, a new one was beginning to emerge. The humans had proven themselves to be ruthless when necessary, but their ultimate goal was not just conquest, it was freedom. They were building a new empire, but one that was not based on subjugation or dominance, but on equality and self-determination. The colonies and races that had once been oppressed under the heel of the old powers now rallied to the human cause. They were not seeking to be dominated, but to share in the power that the humans had forged with their own hands. It was a radical concept for the galaxy, a society that would no longer be ruled by the strong alone, but by the collective strength of its people, no matter their race or origin. Human leaders now stood at the forefront of a new galactic order, no longer the outsiders, but the central figures in a vast web of alliances they had formed, not through force, but through the simple and powerful truth that they were willing to stand for something more than just survival. They were willing to stand for a new way of life, where no one would be left behind. No matter their origins, no matter their history, they would be equals in this new empire humanity had forged. And as the old powers saw this unity growing stronger, they began to fear what might come next. For the first time in centuries, the Council faced a true reckoning. The galaxy's old powers had failed to adapt to the changing times, and humanity had shown them how fragile their dominance really was. The humans had shown them that even the mightiest empires could be toppled, and the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. It was no longer a question of whether humanity would dominate the stars, but how they would choose to shape the future of the galaxy itself. The choices made now would determine not only the fate of the old empires, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The new order was rising, and there was no going back. As the new order solidified across the galaxy, humanity's influence reached even the farthest corners of the known universe. The old empires of the Eldra, Valen, and Kori could no longer ignore the force that had reshaped the galaxy in its image. The Galactic Council, which had once prided itself on its ability to control the destiny of the galaxy, was now forced to reckon with the undeniable fact that humanity had become a power that could not be contained, nor would they bend to the will of the older races. Humanity had rewritten the rules of the galaxy, and now its future lay in their hands. The rise of humanity was not without its challenges, however. There were those within the galaxy who feared what this new power represented. The old empires would not simply fade away and give humanity free rein. Some began to secretly conspire against the humans, hoping to restore the status quo that had once existed, but they had underestimated the unity. Humanity had forged the alliances between humans and smaller races who had once been subjugated by the larger empires were now unbreakable, and together they formed a web of power that stretched beyond the reach of any single faction. Humanity's leadership had proven to be different from the empires they had once fought against. Their desire for self-determination and equality had been the foundation of their strength, and as they began to establish new systems of government throughout the galaxy, they ensured that no race, no matter their size or power, would be excluded from the decision-making process. Humanity's great strength lay in their ability to unite diverse species under a common cause, and with each new world that joined their alliance, the influence of the old powers continued to wane. The Galactic Council found itself in a difficult position. They could no longer ignore the reality that humanity had become the central figure in galactic affairs, but they could not simply embrace this new order without losing their own power. They had no choice but to adapt, and in the coming years, the Council began to shift its structure, allowing for greater representation from the smaller races and from the humans who had now established themselves as a dominant force in galactic politics. But even as the Council bent to accommodate the new reality, there were those who believed that humanity had gone too far. A faction within the Valen and Kori began to plot once more. They believed that humanity's rise threatened the very fabric of the galaxy's balance, and that they needed to act before humanity's influence became too entrenched. They knew that they could not go to war with humanity directly, but they also knew that the growing resistance to human influence was spreading, and if they did not act now, the galaxy would belong to the humans forever. In the meantime, humanity continued to prosper under their new order. Their colonies flourished, and new worlds joined the fold in droves. The older empires and their alliances found themselves unable to keep up with the pace of humanity's expansion. Their former dominance was a fading memory, and those who had once feared humanity now came to admire their ability to rise from nothing to reshape the galaxy in their image. They came to understand that humanity was not just another empire, but a force of nature, a species that had carved its place in history not through brute force alone, but through unity and resolve. Humanity's legacy was now secure. They had proven to the galaxy that it was not strength alone that defined a species, But the will to survive, to fight, to create something new and enduring, they had stood against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. They had changed the course of history, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The question now was not if humanity would rule the stars, but how they would use their newfound power to build a future that was more than just a reflection of their past. It was a future where every species would have a voice and every world would have a chance to thrive under the banner of a new and united galaxy.